And this is WION's continuous coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned that war in Gaza could spread and threaten security in the wider region. And this as an Israeli strike killed 7 people, taking the current death toll to more than 22,000 in Gaza. To talk more on the current situation in Gaza, I'm now being joined by Dr. Mordechai Keder. Dr. Keder is a former senior IDF military intelligence officer. He has served in the IDF for 25 years and he is joining us live from Tel Aviv. Thanks very much for taking out time and joining us here on WION, Dr. Keder.
Nice to hear you.
Dr. Keder, now Netanyahu has clearly outlined 3 goals of Israel's war in Gaza. That is number 1, eliminate Hamas, number 2, release of all hostages, and lastly, effective deterrence. But it has not achieved any of its goals till now. How do you gauge IDF's operations moving forward as the war completes 3 months?
No, Israel succeeded to get rid of Hamas in the majority of the space of the Gaza Strip. There are 2 more places which Hamas has to be dealt with, in Khan Yunis and Rafah, and Israel is determined to get rid of Hamas altogether, both the military and the civil part of Hamas, because no state in the world can live side by side with such an ISIS-like organization. And since the world got rid of ISIS in Syria and Iraq, we have similarly to get rid of this organization in Gaza.
Dr. Keder, you speak of how Israel has been successful in eliminating Hamas till now, but at what cost? Around 22,000 people have been killed in Gaza, and now the reports that your military has to adjust its operations in Gaza due to mounting pressure. Well,
the responsible for this death is, first of all, Hamas, which used the civilians in Gaza as human shields, and the world cannot tolerate such an issue. And don't forget that there is another country which sponsored Hamas for many years, which is Qatar, with big money, which it poured into the Hamas system, and not to mention Iran as well, which equipped Hamas with weapons in order to get rid of the state of Israel. So it's either us or them, and the cost is on the responsibility of Hamas, Qatar, and Iran.
Dr. Keder, you've blamed these Qatar and Iran for the casualties in Gaza, more than 22,000 as we speak. But we've also seen Israeli airstrikes on schools, on refugee camps. The IDF asked people to shift from the northern strip of Gaza to the southern strip. That's Khan Yunis and close to the Rafah border. But these are also the areas where the IDF has intensified its onslaught.
Hamas was using the facilities of UNRWA, of the UN, schools, hospitals, even ambulances were using in order to move people from place to place, combatants from place to place, which is clear violence of and violation of the UN rules. And everybody knew about this. Even the UN knew about what Hamas is using the hospitals and the schools in order to launch attacks from them into Israel, to launch missiles from the schools to Israel. And therefore, these targets or these places should be targeted, because otherwise they will kill us with the missiles which they launch from the schools and the hospitals. And I wonder, would India allow such a situation when any country in the world is launching missiles against India from schools and hospitals?
Dr. Keder, India has taken a neutral stance. It has called for a 2-state solution, and it has also condemned the casualties in Gaza, also the attack by Hamas on Israel. But I want to seek your assessment. Do you think till now Israel has been successful in killing the Hamas deputy chief in an airstrike on Lebanon? That's one killing of a top Hamas leader compared to 22,000 lives lost in Gaza.
Well, whoever tries to mess with Israel should learn the lesson. We didn't start this war. They started it on the 7th of October in a dreadful attack on Israel, killing more than 1,000 Israelis were butchered, were killed, girls were raped on October 7th, and Israel actually is dealing with an organization which the world should have done it before Israel.
Do you think in any way the IDF operation could have been carried out in a manner that could have reduced the civilian casualties?
When Hamas is using civilians as human shields, and they don't allow them and they don't let them run away to the places which Israel designated for them as refuge, so what do you expect? This is unfortunately what happened. And by the way, many of the people in Gaza rejoiced when they heard about what Hamas were doing to us on the 7th of October. So to say that they are innocent civilians is far from reality.
Talking about people in Gaza, a lot of ministers from Israel have asked the Gazans to leave the strip altogether. What is the assessment of that?
Just like Syrians who left Syria because of the atrocities in Syria, millions left Iraq because of the atrocities in Iraq. And this is what happens when in war zones, civilians are running away in order to save themselves. The same thing is in Gaza. What's the problem?
The problem is that where do they go? The IDF has asked them to move to the southern strip and towards the Rafah border, but Egypt is also not accepting them. So what's left of Gazans?
Well, Qatar, which is responsible for what happened in Gaza, has many dormitories which they built for the World Cup a year and 2 months ago, and they have enough place to host the Gazans. After all, they are responsible for the atrocities in Gaza, and the Qatari Air Qatar has 269 airplanes which could take all the people of Gaza within 1 week. They could finish all the agony of Gaza in Qatar, which has enough place and enough dormitories and enough hotels in order to host all the Gazans in Qatar.
Dr. Keter, why do you blame Qatar for the atrocities? Because Qatar and UAE, they also played a major role in mediation between Israel and Hamas, which led to the hostage release, which we saw in the month of November.
Qatar funneled billions of dollars to Hamas through many years in order to acquire weapons, in order to build the tunnels, in order to build all this war machine, which Hamas, instead of building hospitals and schools and take care of the people, what they turned Gaza into a war zone. And this is Qatar, which is responsible for this. So Qatar should bear the consequences of what Qatar did through many years. Iran also is responsible for what happened because Iran supplied the weapons and ammunition to Hamas through many years, through Egypt, by the way, and Egypt also has some responsibility here. And therefore, they all should bear the consequences of what they did for many years.
But how do you assess Qatar's role in mediation talks between Israel and Hamas?
Qatar tries to save Hamas. Qatar tries to, because Qatar believes in the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. They actually were behind Morsi in Egypt. They are behind Hamas. Wherever there is an opportunity for the Muslim Brotherhood to take over a land or a country, Qatar is behind it, also in Libya. Therefore, Qatar is the country which actually incites terror all over the world. And therefore, Qatar should bear the consequences of what Qatar is doing for many years.
Last question to you, Dr. Keter. How do you assess concerns of a growing regionalization of the war, especially after Israel and Hezbollah traded fire across the Lebanon border?
Lebanon also is a poor country, dysfunctional country, which is ruled by a terror organization named Hezbollah. Also, a tentacle of the Iranian octopus, another one. And yes, and just look at this. Iran filled the Middle East with organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah in Iraq, in Syria, in other places, in Yemen as well, the Houthis, because organizations are not bound by the international law. They can do whatever they like. States are bound. And therefore, Iran collected so many organizations and spread them all over the Middle East in order to get rid of Israel, maybe Saudi Arabia as well, and Jordan as well, because they don't like Saudi Arabia, they don't like us, and they don't like the Jordanians. And this is the satanic plan of the Iranians to undermine the Middle East and to make the Middle East part of the greater Iran or the Iranian empire. This is what they say. They don't even hide this intention.
Just a follow-up to the point you made there. Do you think Israel has incited this regionalization of the war when it attacked a Hamas deputy chief in Beirut?
No, the one who spread the war all over the Middle East is Iran, because Iran, as I mentioned, filled the Middle East with organizations which are interconnected with each other, Hezbollah and the Houthis and Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and the militias in Syria and Iraq. They are all connected by Iran. And if Israel attacks the jihadists in Gaza, they all come to help. And this is actually the Iranian influence on the Middle East, which the world, the civilized world, India included, should fight.
My last question to you, when do you think this war will end?
When Iran will stop inciting terror against Israel, because Israel should defend itself. Israel is a country, Western-like country, which wants to survive, wants good life, doesn't look for wars and death. We look for life. Unfortunately, our neighbors, operated by Iran, they look for death for us, and if they die, let it be. They go to heaven to the 72 virgins. This is what they believe, this is what they say.
Right, Dr.
And therefore, we should fight against this terrorism incited, arranged, and organized by Iran.
Right, Dr. Kedar, thanks very much for taking our time and joining us here on Beyond.
Thank you.